Hello, Broken Oars listeners and viewers. This is a follow-up on a few of the little videos I've been putting out on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook recently about my adventures in using legal performance-enhancing supplements to see what works. Now, just a quick note on this. Legal performance-enhancing substances means it is absolutely legal. There is. I didn't go to the doctor for any of these. I'm not about to tell you how to use asthma medication to make yourself go faster. This is literally stuff that you can get from the supermarket or from Amazon and is absolutely not on any banned list. It's not even in a grey area. So, with that out of the way, let's move on. Just a quick rundown of legal performance enhancements. So this is broken down. The thing for which there is the most evidence are known as the big four. They all kind of involve, they start with the letter C. So we've got creatine, caffeine. It's carbonate, but it's actually bicarbonate. And there's a significant difference between the two. And carbohydrate. Arguably, carbohydrate is the most effective and well known. And it is the thing that if you are deficient in, will show up in any form of endurance or even sprint performance very, very rapidly. But to break down the other three, first of all, you have creatine. There is a lot of evidence that creatine works very well for repeated sprint performance. Which is why it's very popular in things like rugby and football. There are pros and cons for using creatine. I personally find it has an intolerable side effect profile. Then we have caffeine, my all-time favorite drug of ever because it's in coffee. Very strong evidence to show that caffeine can promote endurance performance. We'll go into why and how a little bit later in the presentation. And we have this idea of bicarbonate. This is using sodium bicarbonate, which adds to the body's natural buffering system. So that allows you to better maintain your body's level of acidity when you are doing high intensity exercise. Let's put it that way rather than extreme exercise. High intensity exercise where you are using your anaerobic glycolysis system, which as a byproduct will produce hydrogen ions. Now, the precise chemistry is difficult. We'll go into it a little bit, but just to say, it allows you to deal with those hydrogen ions, which are the source of all acidity, slightly better. Now, those are the things for which there is a lot of evidence. There are other things that are pushed as supplements that are useful for endurance performance, but they have less evidence behind them. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is beetroot. This is kind of right at the top of the list. I mean, it would have to be because it's one of the things that I'm going to be using in the little experiment that I did. But the jury is out. It's not a conclusive statement. If you look at people like the Australian Institute of Sport, they say there is some evidence that beetroot enhances endurance performance. However, this may not be the case in the most elite of elite performers. But it's beetroot. It doesn't have a lot of side effects. Then you've got the others. Beta-alanine. Beta-alanine is a non-essential amino acid. It tends to act, again, as a buffering agent. Again, the chemistry is quite complicated, in fact, more complicated than sodium bicarbonate. And again, the jury is out in highly trained individuals. Then we start getting into the things which are genuinely iffy. Ketones. There was a very, very big fuss, and there has been a big fuss about ketones for a long time, since 2012, when apparently just before the Olympics, the British cycling team tried these things out to see if they would work in their athletes and make their athletes go faster. They didn't. The evidence has repeatedly shown that there is no noticeable performance enhancement, and in some cases there is a performance deficit from using ketones. They're still available on Amazon. It'll still tell you it improves your endurance performance. If you want to throw money at the wall, give it a go. But the evidence isn't really on your side. Again, there is a lot of fuss about ketones. Best not to believe it. HMB, hydroxymethyl butyrate. This is a supplement whose day really is done. Excuse me. And is fading from consciousness. The endurance side of things, it was kind of training support. It suggested that it was very useful in reducing muscle loss in people undergoing high volume endurance training. It never really translated into performance enhancement of any form. Again, it's not particularly expensive, but again, the evidence is against it. Finally, we have something called ZMA, which I wanted to bring in there. That is zinc and magnesium acetate, which are very, very soluble zinc and magnesium salts. It's literally just a vitamin. It's a mineral tablet, essentially. But as a mineral tablet, there is absolutely no evidence to support what it says it does, which is improve the production of testosterone. More or less, if it actually did that, it would probably get banned. The guy who invented it, Victor Conte, famous name, was the guy behind the Balco scandal. He's doing the rounds on YouTube at the moment, and I think he's trying to push ZMA again. I don't know what his motivations are. However, I personally find him to be a not entirely reliable witness. I won't say more than that, but when you hear Victor Conte speak about things, everything he says, try and get a second source. Right, so those are the things that we're going to look at. Now, what I did, I went away and I did an experiment on myself. So to outline the experiment, essentially it was, I was going to train until I kind of had a baseline to understand what my performance was. Then I was going to try some supplements and see if they made me go faster. So this is what I did. I had a fixed training program for 3 weeks. Now, I'd have liked it to have been slightly longer, but at the beginning of the summer, I got COVID, so I wasn't really training. That also kind of means that those 3 weeks, I was building up from quite a low baseline. I hadn't been training properly for 2 or 3 weeks before I started this. So these are all things to bear in mind. Every week it was an almost exactly identical training program. There were 3 sessions of long slow distance, 3 more intense sessions, and 2 of those sessions I treated as test pieces. Essentially, I did a 30 rate 20 for the aerobic performance, and I did a 10 by 1 minute for the more anaerobic side of things. The training program, again, as I said, I did this for 3 weeks. Is exactly the same every week, about 64 kilometers of distributed low and high intensity. And after 3 weeks, I started adding in a different supplement each week. And then it was a question, did those 30 rate 20, so 30 minutes at stroke rate 20, did that go any faster? And did the 10 by 1 minutes go faster? And specifically, I was also looking at, could I really push on in the last 1 minute piece? So could I really sprint to the line on that last 1 minute piece? There's a story to be told with each of these things. So the supplements I looked at, well, I had some categories. So not too expensive. The side effects aren't too bad. Doesn't work too well. So not too expensive. I kind of broke that rule because I tried this X Endurance stuff, which is about £45 a month. I'm not sure that's money well spent. If it works for you, great. Didn't work for me. Side effects. I would have included creatine in this. However, I wear glasses. I started wearing glasses after taking creatine about 25 years ago. Before that, I had quite exceptional eyesight. And then suddenly, more or less within about 2 months, I just went short-sighted. That coincided with taking lots of creatine. I do not recommend creatine for this reason. I tried it at very, very low doses recently. It gave me a minging headache every morning. So creatine isn't on this. So isn't too expensive. Side effects are manageable. Okay. And then finally, it doesn't work too well. None of these did. They didn't work too well. However, in general, if as a rower you start taking a supplement and you put on about 5 to 10 kg in a month, you lose body fat while you're doing it, your weightlifting and your 2K scores go through the roof, you're taking something that works too well. Anything that produces those results is on the banned substances list, and you should probably avoid it like the plague. So that's just a little warning about different supplements that you can take. So what did I take? I took beetroot, caffeine, and what is that kind of advertising as the bicarbonate of the future, which is X Endurance. Now, let's talk a little bit about each of these. So firstly, beetroot, otherwise known as, it's not otherwise known, what it's providing, what beetroot and all other leafy green vegetables provide is dietary nitrate. When you consume dietary nitrate, so in the form typically of sodium nitrate, but it's the nitrate ion, NO3, 1-, if you remember your chemistry lessons, it will be converted to nitrite, which is NO2, 1-. Again, it's an ion. It's a molecule with an unbalanced charge. It has a negative charge on it. That will then pass around your body. It's very soluble. Will get into your saliva, and anaerobic bacteria in your mouth will convert it into nitric oxide. This is where you get the nitric oxide boost. The nitric oxide is the stuff that potentially has the performance-enhancing benefits. So, these are, the nitric oxide acts as a vasodilator, so it expands the blood vessels. It allows more blood to get to the muscles. Now, we don't know for certain that this acts as a performance enhancer. However, we do have information that large numbers of Tour de France cyclists were getting themselves prescribed Viagra, because Viagra has exactly the same mechanism. It promotes the production of nitric oxide within the body, which acts as a vasodilator for other areas, shall we say, and it also allows a performance-enhancing effect. And that's been kind of cracked down on these days, but yeah, all these incredibly fit, strong men with massively well-trained cardiovascular systems were suffering from a certain dysfunction that caused them to need Viagra. It's possibly unlikely. Nitric oxide promotes blood flow to the muscles. That's all that we really need to go. Now, slightly more remarkable claim, nitrate, which becomes nitrite, which becomes nitric oxide, then goes on to reduce the oxygen cost of a given exercise load. So if you are cycling at 300 watts, and all the experiments have been done in cyclists, not in rowers, but if you're cycling at 300 watts, you will need a certain amount of oxygen. If you have more nitric oxide than you were expecting, you'll need less oxygen to do the same work. This is a genuinely remarkable result from experiments, and I've seen like the papers that people have published on this, and it seems to be a genuine repeated result, but we don't quite know how this works. This appears to be turning a key in a lock that we thought was absolutely fixed in human metabolism, which is the oxygen cost of exercise, but it seems to reduce it. There's an obvious way in which that could increase performance. And then finally, we're looking at this. Nitrate changes the contractile function of type 2 muscle fibers. So type 2 muscle fibers are famously your fast twitch, your explosive sprinting muscle fibers, and it makes them act like the more efficient slow twitch muscle fibers, which tends to promote the more efficient, less costly, both in terms of byproducts and in terms of the amount of glucose you use. It tends to produce the less costly, it tends to make type 2 muscle fibers, fast twitch muscle fibers, act like slow twitch muscle fibers, which are more aerobic in their energy production, which is a less costly, albeit less immediately effective form of energy production. So within this, you can clearly see how beetroot, which is a source of dietary nitrate, is meant to increase performance. We don't have a precise mechanism for these things, but it does seem to work. Next, caffeine. Now, what I hope you're looking at here is, so again, if you're listening to this, I'm really, really sorry. You're going to start losing out here because I have borrowed one of Asker Joykendrup, who is a professor of exercise physiology, and he does loads of these useful little infographics, and I borrowed it for this presentation at mysportscience.com. And this is how caffeine works. So caffeine has 3 functions that we think lead to increased endurance. The first one, and probably the most important, is that caffeine competitively binds to what is known as the adenosine receptor in the brain. Adenosine is a signal of fatigue, both fatigue that says, I want to go to sleep. That's why caffeine keeps you awake at night. And fatigue that says, I've been working physically really hard and I need to stop. So essentially, caffeine, we don't think its main role isn't to actually give you a physical boost. It is to impede the signals that go to your brain that tell your brain to tell your body to not go as hard. That's what we think the main thing is, and we think this is a remarkably effective mechanism. Next, caffeine seems to promote the use of fat as a fuel, which in turn means that you don't use as much glycogen, and which means your stores of glycogen will last longer. Now, this is not really relevant to people who are racing in events that last for less than 20 minutes. But if you have been sat down and said you want to do a half marathon, this is probably really beneficial. Right, sorry, quick jump cut there. Finally, caffeine appears to help with calcium release, which, and given the importance of calcium, it's not really calcium, it's calcium ions, Ca2+, and these have an enormously important role in the actual contraction of your muscles, which means that the more calcium you have available in your muscles, you have an increased ability, or your muscles have an increased ability to generate force almost regardless of your fatigue levels. So there is always that thing there that says, I can push harder than I would otherwise be able to. Now, caffeine, when we say caffeine, there are some important caveats. You're going to have to take quite a lot of caffeine. Typically, it is between 3 and 9 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So you multiply that 3 to 9 figure, I went for 4.5 in the end, by your kilograms of body weight. And so I had 450 milligrams of caffeine. That is not a small amount of caffeine, but it's not a terrifying amount. It is ostensibly the amount of caffeine that is listed in 6 shots of Starbucks espresso. More to be said about that. You could go up to 900 milligrams of caffeine, which is twice that, 12 shots of Starbucks espresso. That's starting to get like, okay, right, that's slightly ridiculous. If somebody said, I want 12 shots of espresso, just line them up in Starbucks, you'd look at them twice. You'd think they had a problem, and the effect of that wouldn't be pleasant. So when you're checking out your dosage, be careful. The next thing is you can't just use Starbucks espresso or Nescafe instant coffee or brewed coffee, because from day to day, from espresso shot to espresso shot, from batch of brewed coffee to batch of brewed coffee, you cannot get a reliable dose of caffeine from coffee. You will have some caffeine, but it will always be slightly different. And if you want to say, I want 450 milligrams, as I took, you need caffeine tablets or caffeine gels. I would go for caffeine tablets. I would go for Pro Plus, even though other brands are available. And I had 9 of these 50 milligram pills to make 450 milligrams. But just remember, check your dose, check it twice. If you don't like the maths, get help with it. But typically a maximum of 20 caffeine pills. Okay, and that's for a really, really big, heavy guy. That's like somebody who's 120 kilograms, 110 kilograms. No more than that. I don't want somebody making themselves sick here. Moving on. Now, the bicarbonate thing. Now, again, we have a slight problem. I didn't use bicarbonate. I used carbonate and hydroxide. But essentially, the idea behind it is exactly the same thing. Bicarbonate, this thing here, where are we? HCO3 plus, okay? It comes in the form of sodium bicarbonate or baking soda. And, you know, again, you can get this for pennies in the supermarket in a edible form. Normally we have it in much smaller amounts. You actually need to take quite a lot of this, and it's not pleasant. Essentially, the chemistry is actually really complicated, but essentially H plus hydrogen ions are the source of acidity. H plus is reduced when you do intense exercise in the anaerobic zone. So that's a 2K test, that's a 500 meter, that's pretty much anything. This is going to benefit much below half an hour. Genuinely think it will have a benefit. You're going to be producing lactate. The HCO3 reacts with the hydrogen ions, so hydrogen and bicarbonate ions react together, produce water and carbon dioxide that the body can deal with much more easily. They are not as acid. The presence of the hydrogen ions, the presence of acidity in the blood, in the muscle tissues, is thought to be a contributory factor to fatigue and failure in intense exercise. So, removing or providing your body with a greater ability to remove those hydrogen ions will theoretically reduce the onset of fatigue and failure. Now, you know how I said before you needed, I don't know, can I go back here? I think I can. So here we've got caffeine. They don't give you the dose, but it's between 3 and 9 milligrams per kilogram. Here you've got 200 to 300 milligrams per kilogram. This is because it's not affecting your nervous system. This is because you're going to be using glucose that's going to produce hydrogen ions through the anaerobic pathway, and you're going to have to mop them up. You're going to have to react all of them. And this would mean that I, personally, as a 100-kilogram athlete, would have to take roughly, so that'd be 25 grams of bicarbonate roughly an hour before exercise. I've done this before. It allowed me to get a personal best. I think I got 6:13 when I did it. I was a much younger man than I am today. That's never going to happen again. But there's strong evidence that it works. There's strong personal evidence that it works. It's disgusting. Genuinely. It's a really unpleasant. Just drinking the stuff, just drinking the solution that you make of this bicarbonate is grim. Secondly, it makes you feel awful. You are messing with the fundamental pH value, sodium ion levels of your body, and it's very obvious to see why people don't recommend drinking salt water. It's not very nice. You don't feel great, and then you sit on the rowing machine and you rip it to bits. So this was one of the reasons why I didn't actually use sodium bicarbonate. I used something that contained calcium carbonate. This is the X Endurance supplement, which is literally promising the earth. It's saying, get a PB within 10 days or your money back. I'm currently pulling high 620s for 2K. My PB is 609. Anybody watching this who understands rowing or indoor rowing will know I am not going to bridge that gap with what is essentially an insoluble compound that is probably not going to make it out of my large intestine, or my small intestine, in fact. So I'm not going to go into like the details of it, but essentially the active ingredients in X Endurance are calcium carbonate, magnesium hydroxide, and magnesium oxide. You will find these things in simple over-the-counter indigestion remedies such as Settler's Tums, Boots, Windies, and we'll discuss the results. However, this thing here where you've got bicarbonate in the blood, bear in mind calcium carbonate, magnesium oxide, magnesium hydroxide are insoluble salts. They're not going to easily cross from your stomach and from your intestine into your blood. This is a very different mechanism. It's the same chemistry. There's the promise that these things will use up acid that is created, but they're going to have to do it from inside your stomach and not from inside your blood. We might see a reflection of that in the results.
If you're watching now, you may have noticed a sudden jump cut, and I think I'm wearing a tie, and I've got the glasses on, and I've got the little earpiece mic. This is because I changed things somewhat. You're still looking at the results, you're still looking at the same video, but after making most of this video where I explained everything, I realized, why can't I just go and do a bicarbonate week? Why can't I do a 30 rate 20 and a 10 by 1 minute on the old bicarbonate and see how it goes? And so I did. So we're going to have down here, we're going to have the results from bicarbonate, we're going to have X Endurance, we're going to have caffeine, we're going to have all these things. So first of all, let's talk about beetroot. Well, let's talk about the experiment and how it went. So for 3 weeks in a row, I followed a very, very static training program. There were 3 sessions of long, slow distance, 3 harder sessions, including the 2 test sessions of a 30 rate 20 and a 10 by 1 minute. And within that, as you can see, from week 1 to week 2 to week 3, I made slow but steady improvement. So in the 30 rate 20, it averages out at about 1.1% improvement per week. With this here, again, very similar, and in like what I call the pre-exhausted 1 minute power. So a big push on the last piece of the 10 by 1 minute. It seems like if we can look here, we made much more improvement. Now, the improvements for each of these are related to these figures, the week 3 figures, to see how much further on from, shall we say, the baseline improvement of here about 1.5%. Here, it's less than 1.5%. It's about 1.1%. Here is about 1% a week. And here, call it about 2.5% a week. And we'll see how we got on. So, with beetroot, there was a noticeable jump in improvement. Now, again, placebo effect might come into this, but the placebo effect, if you can persuade yourself to have a placebo effect, this is incredibly valuable. So, my 30 rate 20 improved in 1 week by 3.31%. Now, you've got to remember, I was getting better at doing 30 rate 20s. I understood the demands of the event more, etc., etc., etc. I was able to time things, but as you can see, there was essentially a 7 watt improvement where I hadn't seen more than a 4 watt improvement. That felt like there was a big effect with the beetroot. Onto the sustained anaerobic power, 10 by 1 minute. I don't know if intervals should be called sustained, but I'm calling it sustained anaerobic power. Anyway, again, we saw a fairly significant improvement. We went from 452 watts on average to 461, and there was a very, very big jump. There was a 3.5% improvement increase in that final sprint, that big, meaty sprint to the line. Now, again, you have to balance this against the fact that I'd done another week's training, but really, I was quite happy with this. I was genuinely quite happy. It was working well. On another week, another 65k of training under my belt, more practice at the events. How did caffeine affect me? Well, here we go. So again, there was an improvement. Now this 4% improvement, this is compared to the 207. This is the baseline from week 3, where up until this point we've been seeing a 1.5% improvement, less, or 1.1. Here I saw 4% in 2 weeks with caffeine. So I think that was really noticeable. I mean, that I went out hard. 283 watts comes out to about 147.3. That was a season's best. That was probably the best thing I've done for 2 years, I think. Then what we had here was, again, another increase. So again, you have to say 3.1% is the improvement over week 3. So divide that in 2. So you're having roughly a 1.5% improvement in the same region as the beetroot improvement. We got a better result, as you might expect, for having another week's training from having done the event once more. But I wasn't just like scraping fractions of a split from this. This was a noticeable improvement. This was a whole split faster, from 461 to 466, whole split. However, the caffeine week led to the first failure in the experiment. So the peak pre-exhausted 1 minute power, big push on the last piece, 255 watts. It was a complete collapse. I didn't make it. Now, I attribute this not to the lack of caffeine's ergogenic effects, but due to the fact that it reduced my judgment. I wasn't able to say, you know what, I know how I'm going to take this on. Now, so that was a real collapse. That was a slight disappointment. Something to bear in mind when you're using caffeine as an ergogenic aid, that you need to have a very clear race plan and you need to not get too excited. Understand your own limits very, very clearly. Right, then on to the X Endurance. Now, the X Endurance is just calcium carbonate, chalk. It will react with an excess of hydrogen ions, provided those excess of hydrogen ions can get to the calcium carbonate. Now, the calcium carbonate is going to remain within your stomach or your intestines because it is insoluble. It won't get into the bloodstream. And so let's see what happened. Now, we actually went backwards with the X Endurance. We pretty much went back with 3 watts higher. It was a slight improvement over week 3, but a genuinely marginal, considering I'd done the event this was the 3rd time after week 3 that I'd done the event, and so you're looking at less than 0.5% improvement a week with the X Endurance. Really disappointing. But again, this was the most expensive supplement. I can't say that I can personally recommend this. The sustained anaerobic power, the 10 by 1 minute, was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. I blew up on rep 7. I tried again on rep 8 to get it going again. It didn't work. This 461 watts, that was the average for the first 7 pieces. It's not really that relevant. Really, this was a did not finish. I don't think I gained any noticeable improvement in the sustained anaerobic power from the X Endurance. Now, after that, so this is the problem. Up until the X Endurance week, I had a very, very steady and very consistent training program of 6 days a week, 64-ish kilometers a week, with a very similar intensity distribution. Then, because I said I was going to, I wouldn't say I took a week off, but I did a deload week. So I just did some weights. I think I did the CTC, which was 3 lots of Tabata sessions all stitched together. It was horrible, by the way. I did really badly. I didn't enjoy it, but I did 1 session in that week. And then I came back and then I started a 1K training program because I'm trying to ramp up the speed, ramp up the intensity, reduce the volume, because I'm now training for the British Indoor Rowing Championships, where I'm going to have a go at the 500 meter event. Now, the important thing to understand is everything else, the training was very similar. Here, the training had really slacked off. So when I came to do a 30 rate 20 in this bicarbonate week, it'd been about 10 days since the rather disastrous 1 minute peak power, and I hadn't done a lot of training. I'd done some weights, I'd done maybe 3 ergo sessions, and the results were fairly shocking. I matched my season's best. I actually went, it says 283 watts. I actually went 2 meters further than in the caffeine week. So I did 8,385 as opposed to 8,383. So it was basically a season's best on a slightly, let's just say I was well rested at that point. A noticeable improvement over week 3. Despite having deloaded the previous week. The sustained anaerobic power, I really was impressed with the effect of bicarbonate on this. So first of all, it was almost as fast as the caffeine week, which is the best week, but I managed to do all 10 reps. So that's a real improvement, as opposed to just doing 9 reps. Well, and this is the average of those 9 reps. It's not including the 255. So I think the sum total of all 10 reps was much better than the caffeine week. And the final, the big pre-exhausted push, it wasn't as good as beetroot week, but it was still pretty good. It was still a definite increase in pace in the last 1 minute. And every one of these, so the beetroot week, the caffeine week, the X-endurance week, when I tried this workout, it left me flat on my back, next to the rowing machine, gasping like a landed fish. We've all been there. If we've done the sport for long enough, we've all been there. And my recommendation very much is that this works really well, because the whole way through I was holding myself back. I was like, oh no, I don't want to blow up. I don't want to blow up. I don't want to try and beat caffeine week. I want to go as fast as caffeine week. And I was able to. In this last 1 minute push, I didn't want to blow up like caffeine week. I held myself back, but I was still able to really go. And at the end of it, I was breathing very heavily. I was very tired. But I would say that it just wasn't as bad. It was actually much, much better. I felt better. I felt like I had more to give. Now, I would not say that bicarbonate is in any way side effect free, and we'll discuss that in a second. But let's crack on to our conclusion. Beetroot seems to work. No side effects. Pretty cheap. That's great. I'm back on beetroot now because there's just nothing. You just feel okay on it. Caffeine, I'd say it definitely works. The side effects are manageable. You feel pretty rubbish the next day. You kind of have a headache, like you drunk too much coffee. But you have to have a very, very clear race strategy. You have to plan for marginal gains. You're not going to suddenly get 3 pips. You can get carried away. You can get too excited. You can blow up. It's basically free. I think I took 9 Pro Plus pills, which I calculated came out to about 72 pence. Right. X-endurance. This had no effect on me. Read into that what you will. It provided no improvement above beetroot or caffeine. It's actually really, really expensive. So it's like £45 a month. You're meant to take it constantly. And unlike bicarbonate, which I don't know, I used a 65p tub of Sainsbury's just bicarbonate of soda, and I used 4 teaspoons out of 200 grams of it. So bicarbonate really works. However, and it's just peanuts. Now, let's talk about, before we go any further, let's talk about the problems with bicarbonate. So the first time I did the bicarbonate, I had about 2 hours before I actually did the 30 rate 20 piece, which was great. And I think that's a bit of a sweet spot for me, because it does create, it's a really unpleasant thing to drink. You got to drink your way through about 2 teaspoons full in 2 liters, and the stuff tastes foul. I don't feel as bad as the last time I tried bicarbonate. So I don't know if it was on a different dosing strategy back then, and we're talking like 12 years ago or something. But getting those teaspoons of bicarbonate, 2 teaspoons full, it's not a pleasant experience. It feels like trying to glug your way through 2 liters of soapy salt water. It really tastes foul. And once it's inside you, you can start to feel it's fizzing, you're bloated, it's not nice. And that passes a bit after about 2 hours, But after an hour, which is when I did the 10 by 1 minute, so I left an hour between drinking the bicarbonate solution and doing the actual piece, my warm-up was miserable. I felt bloated. I felt a bit sick. I couldn't hold pace. So this was the thing I was doing. I went out to do my warm-up piece at 1 minute 59, and I was all over the place. I was going up to like 202 and down to 157, and that's the indication of a very, very fatigued athlete, that you can't just keep your pace. I didn't feel great until I actually started the sprints, and then it felt like I was sprinting. It felt really hard. I couldn't have gone a lot faster. I didn't actually necessarily have the wherewithal in my legs to push that much harder. But suddenly I just wasn't killing me. I wasn't breathing as hard. It wasn't hurting my lungs. I didn't have the burn in my legs. The bicarbonate for me was really, really effective. Now, final thoughts. All the things that I've tried that have worked that are legal, are cheap and easily available. Okay? That should be, if somebody is charging you like 50 quid a bag or something like that, just think it's either illegal or it's not going to work. Okay? The next thing is check your dosage twice. Really think. All the recommendations come in milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So you've got to multiply the number of milligrams per your body weight. And okay, I don't want to. Some people aren't great at maths. I'm not being rude, but as I'm talking about this, if you're not great at maths, get somebody to check your dosage. And I'm just going to say flat out, no more than 40 grams in total for bicarbonate, no more than 20 Pro Plus pills. Even what I'm saying, that just sounds madness. 20 Pro Plus pills, that sounds like some degenerate methamphetamine addict who can't access methamphetamine is trying to make up for it. But that would be an actual dose for a 110 kilogram athlete taking 9 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. It's about an actual gram of caffeine. Now, I would also say 40 grams of bicarbonate, of sodium bicarbonate, it's a big number as opposed to the gram of caffeine or the so what did we have? I'm just going to scroll back here. Beetroot, a gram of caffeine, X-Endurance beetroot was about 3 grams a day. So when you're saying 40 grams total of sodium bicarbonate, you're putting 40 grams of a sodium salt into you. If you said that to a doctor, they would look at you like you were mad or trying to poison yourself. It's actually not that bad. 40 grams is essentially 2.5 heaped tablespoons. It's not advisable, and it's not a brilliant idea. And as I said, it makes you feel quite bad. I don't recommend it. But here's the key thing. It's not as terrifying as it actually seems when you actually start to measure it out. If you think that a store-bought pizza, if you ate 2 big store-bought pizzas, you'd be a bit of a glutton, but we've all been there. That would give you roughly the same amount of sodium at the same time. There'd be a lot of teaspoons of salt in those big pizzas if you ate them. So it's not insane. It's not an insane amount. But if you're out by a factor of 10 or even a factor of 5, you're going to start consuming like a worrying amount of this stuff, so be careful. Check your dosage twice. I'm going to reiterate this. Next, final thoughts. If you're under the age of 18 and you're thinking, and if you're listening to this podcast, well, God help you get a life. But if you're listening to this and think, oh, that'll work, don't. Not if you're under the age of 18. Just not worth it. You're smaller. Your body systems aren't as formed. What are you doing messing around with hundreds of milligrams of caffeine or tens of grams of bicarbonate? Nothing you are doing under the age of 18 is really worth kind of like faffing with all this stuff. Final point. The biggest benefits I saw did not come from the performance enhancing supplements. They came from training consistently and eating lots of food. These are the most important things, and those are the things I recommend as your basic ergogenic aids. Lots of training, lots of food, balanced diet, vegetables, very important, people. Right, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this. Those are my thoughts on the legal performance enhancing supplements that are out there.